According to The Telegraph, Michel Hussein failed to sufficiently challenge a guest over anti-Semitic conspiracies on the BBC's Today programme. And the broadcaster has apparently admitted this and apologised for it, saying that they failed to sufficiently challenge an Iranian guest who accused Israel of being an ethno-supremacist state that is committing a Holocaust in Gaza. So it is good that they apologised for Mohammed Marandi, the professor from the University of Tehran, appearing on Radio 4's flagship morning news programme, The Today Show. But here's a strange thing. They put him on again just the next day on BBC News, and he went again pretty much completely unchallenged with very much the same allegations, the same ridiculous slanders and calumnies about Israel. Have a watch of this report. You'll see that they do exactly the same thing. And this guy is like some sort of literature professor in a Tehran university. It's not like he actually has any expertise on this topic anyway. So just have a watch and you'll see what I mean.
Well, Mohammed Marandi is Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran and joins us now. Thank you for being with us. I know you're in Beirut. You will have heard the condemnation from the US and from the British Prime Minister. What is the chance now of a de-escalation in the region?
It depends on the Israeli regime. The Israeli regime has been carrying out a genocide in Gaza. It has been carrying out genocidal attacks in Lebanon with the full support of the British government, the American government, and they are just as guilty of these war crimes as is Netanyahu. And when the Israeli regime assassinated a foreign official in Iran, the political leader of Hamas, when the Israelis assassinated him at the UN Security Council, the British refused to allow a condemnation. So effectively, the British, the Americans, the French supported the airstrike on Iran's embassy. They supported the assassination of a foreign leader, diplomat in Iran. Well, under those circumstances, they are the ones who are guilty of bringing about escalation. They continue to feed the Israeli regime with bunker busters to slaughter people here in Beirut, and then they condemn Iran. I think people should be very careful about what's happening. One of your guests said that the Iranian attacks didn't cause any damage. I'm glad to know that he knows all the results of the airstrikes before the Israelis know about them.
Just to pause him there, this clown says that Israel has carried out a genocide in Gaza and also in Lebanon. Of course, there is no such finding from anywhere that Israel has carried out a genocide. In fact, the International Court said that they specifically didn't find that. And there's been this much touted idea that they said there was a potential or plausible genocide, but then it was clarified that they never said that on the BBC itself. And then he says that Britain and America are actually guilty of that as well by his strange process of non-logic. So all of this so far, notice, completely unchallenged by the presenter, by the news presenter, not in any way doing her job and answering back to this, questioning it, exposing it for the nonsense and propaganda that it is from Tehran. But let's go on.
The fact is that this is the tip of the iceberg. Iran has many underground cities that they made after the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan by the Americans to defend the country against a possible invasion. Iran has hundreds of thousands of missiles. If they want to go after the Israeli regime, they'll destroy it.
But the question is, are we basically seeing direct war now between Iran and Israel? Because the US has also said so far there is no sign of, mercifully, as they see it, of course, of anyone being injured or hurt as a result of these strikes in Israel. But Iran has said this was only the first wave. Are you expecting a further attack from Iran to Israel?
Just pausing her again. Notice that is her question. She's let everything he said so far go completely unchallenged. All of that propaganda about Britain and America being somehow complicit in war crimes and genocide carried out by Israel. All of these wild allegations. This is going out on the BBC. It's not really like the British Broadcasting Corporation at all. It's more like the Iranian Revolutionary Broadcasting Corporation, the IRBC, or the Tehran Broadcasting Corporation, perhaps the TBC. But no, this apparently is the voice of the nation. The British broadcaster has this to put out as some sort of valid analysis of what's going on in the Middle East. It's absolutely extraordinary and outrageous.
I'm very confident that the Israelis have suffered a major blow, and I understand how the Israelis and the Americans would hide their losses and their damage. That really doesn't bother us. What is important is that the Americans understand that Netanyahu needs this war. And if Netanyahu gets his war and the Americans get involved, all the US assets in the Persian Gulf will be gone. And those countries that host them, they will be gone. Those missiles and drones will destroy all the oil and gas installations and the ships and the tankers that carry them. They'll be swept away in Iraq. The resistance in Iraq will deal with the Americans. Do the Americans want that? That will lead to a global economic crisis that we haven't seen since 1929 and will be worse than that. And then you will, after the global economy collapses, you'll have millions of people on the move. To the people of England, the United States, Europe, is that what they want? Then let their leaders continue to support this genocidal maniac in Tel Aviv.
Genocidal maniac in Tel Aviv. And this is from a man who is just on behalf of the genocidal regime in Tehran, the Islamic Republic, has literally just threatened the elimination, not just of Israel, but of any allies that actually fight against the theocratic terror regime in Iran and its proxies in the region. He's literally threatened to wipe them out. Quite extraordinary. Still, no comment from that BBC News presenter. I'm not sure what she's doing at this moment. We can't see her. But she's just listening, taking it all in, apparently thinking this is completely valid. Her job to challenge him, maybe, to call out some of this nonsense. No, just sitting there listening.
You will know, of course, that Israel say that this is them defending themselves against Hezbollah attacks and against the attack by Hamas a year ago. It is not in anyone's interest for this to continue, is it? And the strikes by Iran today have been, said by the US and by Israel to be ineffective. So is Iran bluffing when it proclaims this strength?
Israel will say, she tells us. Israel will say. So you say this, Israel will say that. This is the BBC's idea of what they call due impartiality. She's putting both sides. This crazy, crazed clown giving propaganda from Tehran is apparently just being countered by Israel will say. This is quite extraordinary, even for the BBC. This is just beyond. This is another level.
I don't know. Are you acting as their spokeswoman?
I'm asking questions as a journalist, as you know.
The Iranian strikes were very effective.
She's asking questions as a journalist, as you know. Well, I wouldn't say she's much of a journalist, and I certainly wouldn't say she is an Israeli spokeswoman. I'd say she's acting quite effectively here as a facilitator for a Tehran Iranian regime spokesperson, completely unchallenged so far.
And I think the Israeli regime should be very wary about striking back at Iran, because Iran has already said if they strike back, we will beat them to submission. So they had to be very careful. And Hezbollah has thousands of missiles, heavy whip missiles underground that have been untouched. Have no doubt. Hezbollah's military has been untouched. A number of senior officials have been murdered in Beirut, but there are thousands of kilometers of underground tunnels and their bases are all untouched. And you have Yemen, you have Iraq. The Israeli regime had better know its place. It's time to end the genocide. It's time to end the Holocaust. Is that a great expectation?
Okay. Well, the US obviously pushing, and others obviously pushing for a de-escalation and a ceasefire. But we're going to have to leave it there. Mohammed Marandi, thank you very much indeed for being with us from the University of Tehran, speaking to us from Beirut there.
Thank you very much for being with us, she says. This is all she has to say after that tirade of nonsense. He's accusing Israel of carrying out a Holocaust. This from a state which denies the actual Holocaust, which saw the killing of over 6 million Jews, the industrialised, deliberate murder and genocide. This is quite extraordinary, even for the BBC. This is a new level of depravity from their news broadcasting. This is a new low. This presenter ought to be taken off air immediately. She ought to be fired. She's completely useless at her job. I think the BBC has an awful lot to answer for, especially considering, just remember, as I said at the beginning, this guy was on the Today programme, the BBC's main news programme, their flagship radio programme, and they've already admitted that they didn't challenge him enough on the Today programme. So why on earth did they invite him back onto their news channel on television? Why on earth did they give this man a platform again? Once you've heard what he has to say once, you can tell he's a propagandist for a terror regime. It's very simple. This is not an analyst. They even introduce him as a professor of literature. This is not somebody the BBC should be platforming and putting on air. He shouldn't be giving us his opinions. They should be challenging those opinions if for some reason they think he's valid to give analysis on this topic. But instead, they put him on over and over again, unchallenged, even once they'd admitted that there was a problem in his original contribution. Absolutely shameful.